George has often been accused of being obstinate about keeping his colonies. And actually, his obstinacy may have caused the war to last 2 years longer than it should have. But recent studies tend to defend him by saying that at this time, no ruler would have abandoned such a large territory.
The loss of the colonies was a hard blow for George, whose ambition was to be seen as a good and fair king, and a figure of unity of the kingdom. It was a personal humiliation, and he eventually accepted his defeat, hoping that the profits Britain made with its colonies would remain the same with the US as his trade partner. In 1785, he said to John Adams, "I was the last to consent to the separation, but the separation having been made and having become inevitable, I have always said, as I say now, that I will be the first to meet the friendship of the United States as an independent power." After that, from the early 1718, the king's withdrawal from British politics was already noticeable. He spent a lot of his time with his wife at Windsor, where he gained his nickname Farmer George. Indeed, he had great interest in farming, and even owned 3 farms at Windsor. He actually preferred a quiet and stable domestic life, farming, hunting, or playing cards with his friends in the evening. Of course, the loss of the colonies led to another period of instability. The negotiation for the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which marked the end of the Revolutionary War, rested upon the government of the Duke of Portland and the alliance of Lord North and Charles James Fox from the Whig Party, who openly supported the American cause. Actually, George hated Fox, thinking he was a bad influence for the Prince of Wales, with whom he was very close. The king also didn't appreciate not being able to choose his minister. One of his ambitions was to come back to a meaningful royal power. After the ratification of the treaty, which recognized the United States and ceded Florida to Spain, the alliance broke, and North had to resign in 1782. After North, Lord Rockingham became Prime Minister, but died 4 months later. Then, Lord Shelburne took office, but some Parliament members, including Fox and Burke, were not willing to serve him. They formed an opposition, and the ministry eventually fell. The king was at his lowest point and even considered abdication. A solution eventually came to him, and in December 1783, he appointed William Pitt the Younger, son of William Pitt the Elder, as Prime Minister. For George, it was a real victory that proved that he could choose his PM without the choice of the majority in the House of Commons. It was not easy, as Pitt's government was in a minority in the House of Commons, but a general election in 1784 allowed Pitt to be chosen by the country. After that, the king gained popularity, and Pitt dominated British politics for the next 20 years. The king did not agree with many of Pitt's ideas, but without him, he would be at the mercy of Fox. It was a compromise he was making, but this compromise has in fact proved to be judicious. Eventually, this period of calm ended with George's first mental issue. Indeed, in the summer of 1788, he went mad, and this period of violent insanity was to last for several months.
Of course, for those who don't know, you want to know the reason behind his nickname, the Mad King. After all, it is this nickname that makes him so famous among all the British kings and queens.
In recent studies, historians trying to justify his madness with a genetic blood disorder called porphyria, but a new research actually indicates that King George did suffer from mental illness. This research is based on thousands of letters sent by the king. During his episode of illness, the sentences were much longer than when he was in his normal state. They were also more complex, with repetitions. These characteristics can be found also in bipolar patients' writings or speeches. We also have testimonies of witnesses who spoke about his incessant loquacity and the convulsions where he sometimes suffered from, forcing his page to sit on him to keep him safe on the floor. One of the main symptoms of porphyria is blood urine, which was also the king's most famous symptom. But the research found that this could simply have been caused by one of his medicine made out of a blue flower that can cause urine to turn blue. The king thought he could see Hanover through a telescope, or that London was to be flat. He was eventually put into a stress jacket as a lunatic. The reason behind this probably all the stress he had to face during his difficult reign. Indeed, the king had not always been the most confident, and despite being hard-working and willing to take the right decisions, the trouble he had to endure have overcome his mental health. Also, he was very worried about his children whom he loved deeply, maybe excessively. He even was depressed when his elder son, Prince of Wales, came of age as it meant his emancipation from the family. Of course, his mental problems caused him to withdraw from the political life to recover at the Kew Palace, near Richmond. But it was not only his problems, as every time he went it caused new political crises. Who was going to replace him? His son, the Prince of Wales, the future George IV, wanted to be king regent. By his association with the opposition, as he was a close friend to the Whig leader, Fox made the governor willing to kick him out. Indeed, the parliament members could still respect George as the king despite his estate, were reluctant to have his political enemy as head of government. Eventually, George went better when the governor was to pass the regency bill. The king, who was still dedicated a diligent regained his popularity among the politicians. Moreover, the French Revolution happened. The British realized how much they loved their constitutional king, symbol of stability, instead of an arrogant and power-hungry emperor such as Napoleon. Actually, his virtue has been acknowledged, more especially his calmness, even though he suffered 2 attempts of assassination. Despite his popularity, the king never really traveled. He always stayed in the south of England. First, because he showed very little interest in his dominions, Hanover, Scotland, and Wales of Ireland. And second, because his disease never really went away and was still keeping him in a bad state. In 1800, the government passed the Act of Union to unite the king's realms in Britain and Ireland under a single state. It led to the creation of a new flag, which is still the same today. But in 1801, although he seemed to recover, the king's disease struck again, and his own family became fearful of him. Queen Charlotte refused to sleep in the same bed as him. He also began to lose sight. The final strike came in 1810, when the king was 72. It could have been caused by the death of George's youngest and favorite daughter, Princess Amelia, at the age of 27. His mental health deteriorated further. For example, he thought he could summon the dead, or that he was secretly married to another woman. Recognizing his inability to reign, the government passed the Regency Act in 1811. He given his son, the Prince of Wales, authority to carry out his official duties. The king's relationship with his son was not good, and was a source of anxiety to him, as the Princess of Wales' personality and depth brought embarrassment to him and the royal family. He was deeply affected. To see that his son was escaping little by little, in 1812, another war with the US happened, and Britain was already busy fighting against Napoleon. The Napoleonic Wars ending in 1815 with the Battle of Waterloo and the victory of Duke Wellington. This was one of the greatest British victories. The 18th century was a period of important advancement in economy, politics, art, and science. England became a symbol of elegance and excess in the image of its regents, but George never really noticed, and he was not losing and lived in a sheltered life in Windsor Garden. He had become blind, deaf, in pain, and oblivious of everything. Evidence of his ways in 1818, but he was, without knowing it, at the peak of his popularity, with a image of father of the nation, not loyal to his country. He eventually died on January 29, 1820, which ended the regency of his son.
So, in the end, was King George III such a disastrous king as his nickname suggests? Well, though his reign was indeed marked by the loss of the colonies and his madness, and though it is what people remember the most about him, he was actually liked and respected by most people and members of parliaments. He was also depicted as a man of the people, especially with his nickname, Farmer George. He ultimately became a figure of resistance against Napoleon Bonaparte. his tendency to favor stability and to trust his parliament over most policy set the tone for his successors. King George, who was the one who wanted to restore royal power, was actually the one who planted the roots for a symbolical power tradition and a constitutional monarchy, which is the form of monarchy we can see today in Britain.